Welcome back to another video with MRS Hobbies. I'm Chad Smith. I'm going to be working on the brand new 1970 Pontiac Firebird kit. This is actually going to be a commissioned build for the store itself. So this will, once I'm done with this will live in the store. So if you want to see it, come on down to MRS Hobbies. I just took the wrapper off, so this is going to be an out of the box. We'll go through the parts here a little bit. I'll be taking a lot of these out of the plastic so we can see them a little bit better. I love these pad printed tires, the Firestone big ovals on there. Those are going to be neat. This is actually a 2-in-1 kit. It actually comes with some separate high performance or low profile tires and some rims. So we'll get to that in a second. Just get everything out of the box here and get that out of the way. Let's start with the instructions. So our nice decal sheet. Again, so it's also a 2-in-1, but you can do for the build itself, but you can actually do it in 2 different colors. So maybe it's a 4-in-1 if you want to get technical. The color that was chosen is actually going to be the blue. So if we look at the box, we're going to be doing the one that's up front, so the blue Firebird. And for that color, we'll be actually using the Tamiya, just the Tamiya basic blue. Let's use the flat blue because I like to do a clear coat on my stuff. So which means we'll be using the white decals for that. So those are some of the neat things about this. It's really got a lot of small interesting decals for the interior, like the window cranks, some of the other things on here that are pretty interesting. So our transmission indicator, the engine turn dash panel, some pretty interesting decals, some pretty nice stuff. So good job Revell on that. They're coming out with some nice stuff. Alright, so just the instructions. Again, they're pretty much, if you've done Revell kits, pretty standard for them. If you haven't, so we have our paint chart up here, a couple of different languages, and then our parts labeling all through, and then of course we get into our instructions, the actual instructions. Pretty basic kit, not too many parts to it. So just a few pages, and then we get into our paint or our decal placement sheet. Again, for either color or either model that you're going to be doing. So that's nice. All right, so let's start looking at some plastic here. So how I'm going to do this is going to be a walkthrough build. I'll try to do as much of it on camera as I can so you guys can see 90% of the process. And I say 90% because I am in a store and I can't, I do airbrushing when I do my paints. So my painting will be done at home. So that'll be actually off camera. But the rest of it, I'll try to walk you through kind of how I do things. Step by step. A lot of this stuff I have learned from other people and myself, just kind of building as I go. Scale Modeling channel, I got a shout out to him. I've watched his stuff. I've gotten a lot of good tips and techniques from him, so I have to give kudos to him because some of the techniques I'll be using I actually learned from him, so I need to give credit where credit is due. But by no means am I an expert. I still consider myself the new guy in the hobby. I mean, I did cars when I was younger. We're just going to do this, and I'll just show you some of the things that I've learned from other people, like I said, and some of the things I've learned through pain and suffering on my own, maybe to help you alleviate some of that on your builds. All right, so we'll go through and look at some of these. The engine is, again, molded in 2 pieces, which is pretty standard. The transmission is attached to it. We'll be masking that off and painting the transmission, the engine block, separate colors. So one of the things that you want to do is wash everything in just some mild soap and water. A little caution on the soap. Don't use soaps that have extra lotions and scents and extra stuff added into them. If you can get just a basic hand soap or something like that, even a little bit of dish soap, just something with not a lot of additives in there, that because a lot of those lotions and stuff will actually leave a film on your plastic, which is what you're trying to get off of your plastic. It's a mold release, so when they mold the parts, they spray a little release agent on I think it's on the mold plates itself. So when the mold releases, it'll release the plastic a little bit cleaner. So you don't want that on there because it's a contaminant on the surface essentially, and it won't allow the paint to stick as well as it needs to. So interior is pretty good. The rear seats are molded in. Partial shelf's got some texture on it, so you can, if you don't want to, I'll be actually doing a little bit of flocking on mine, and we'll get to that when we get in there. But if you don't want to do that, you can actually just paint it up and it'll have a little texture on there for you. So that's a nice addition. Door cards are inserted molded into the body as well. So things are looking pretty good. One thing I did notice, like I said, I did buy a kit for myself, so I've kind of, in preparation for this, gone through it a little bit ahead of time for a little bit of preparation, but the carburetor is molded in 2 pieces, and it is really detailed. I mean, that's really beautiful. Unfortunately, that's going to be covered up mostly by the air intake. But nevertheless, it's really sharp looking, and with the 2 pieces, you can paint it some different colors, so give it a little bit more definition and stand out a little bit more. One thing I don't like is the exhaust is molded in with the rear axle. So I've been trying to figure out how I'm going to do that. I'll probably have to do some masking to get that to be separate. It just makes it a little bit tougher for painting. You just have to get a little bit creative and careful with some of your masking techniques. But again, it allows you some practice in doing that. So the exhaust headers have some nice texture on them for the cast iron look, which is a nice feature. Steering wheel's nice and crisp. So all in all, pretty clean kit. Rear tail panel looks nice. It's got some raised lettering with the emblem on there, so that looks pretty nice. The hood looks pretty straight and clean. There's a couple of little injection mold pin marks on there. The thing with these is there's a lot of fine line detail under the hood, and these pin marks are kind of in the middle or intermixed with these fine line details. So you can see a little bit right there, right next to these vent marks. There's the pin mark, and they're all on all 4 corners. So if you want to take those off, that's going to be a little bit of a struggle. To just be careful with those so you're not taking out your details. So another thing is the rear differential cover is molded in with the drive line. So again, that's not too bad. Just a little simple mask around there, and you can get those colors separated. Alright, so that's the front end. The chassis, of course, the seats, bucket seats, they're usually in 2 pieces, which in this kit they are as well. So it's pretty standard procedure. Glue those on, file them up. Okay, so a couple other things I've noticed too on the chassis itself is there is a lot of pin marks on this. Just pretty much up and down. So everywhere I'm putting a mark, I'm marking up the pin injection marks that we will need to take off. For those of you that are beginning, I mean, I am going to go through a little bit of some advanced or moderate techniques. You do not have to do these if you don't want to. If you're just starting out in the hobby, welcome. We're excited to have you. But don't feel like the things that I'm showing you are the process that you have to do on your model. These are just my suggestions. Again, things I've learned from other people, things that I prefer to do myself. I think when I was younger, I don't even remember painting my first model. I think I just put it all together, which I would recommend if you're just starting out. Yeah, you don't have to paint it. Again, you're building for you. You're building what you want to build. And just the process of learning kind of how kits go together, what glues to use, what works, what doesn't work. Yeah, just start out, build how you want to build. And every time, so when I do a build, I try to learn, or through pain and suffering, I end up learning something every time I do a build that makes my next build better. And that's the process. Again, this is a hobby. This is something that we enjoy doing. So do it the way you enjoy doing it and learn a little bit as you go. So what I'm doing is I use a magic marker, or a Sharpie marker, just to basically give me a guide coat, so that we can see I can see what I'm working on. Once I put that guide coat on there, you can see some of the how close I'm getting to having that completely taken off. So that one's pretty close. That one I've got some more work. Obviously, it's raised up a little bit still. So I just use that as a guide coat so that as I'm going through my build, I know kind of when the black is gone, I've pretty well got everything smoothed off. So that's one thing I did notice about the chassis, is there is a lot of injector pin marks. For some of you, just another disclaimer, some of my verbiage might be a little bit off, so bear with me. Again, I'm still kind of learning stuff myself. Anyway, and then the other thing that you want to watch for is a lot of times you get the copyright markings on the bottoms of kits. Again, it's up to you. I did a ton of cars before I even knew about taking off injector pin marks and copyright insignias and things like that. So once I get that Sharpie marker on there, and then I start sanding it off, it'll really highlight that, so now you can see really what I'm talking about. So Revell, almost all models underneath, you're going to see the copyright info stamped in there. And kind of the idea, if you're going to get into competitive building, the idea is to build it as close to the real car as possible, right? And real cars don't have Revell LLC 1991 China stamped on the bottom of them, and they don't have injector pin marks. Like I said, I mean, I built tons of cars where I didn't take those off, didn't even really know about them. And they just sit on my shelf, and I love them, and they look great. But as I've advanced, I've kind of learned through competition, through some of the people I've met, some of the other things that yeah, if you want to be a little bit more competitive, that's probably the biggest thing that judges look for, or one of the main things judges look for, is, oh, I'm getting close to the bottom. Okay, I gotta watch that. Sorry guys. I'm still figuring out. This is a new camera system, so we're still trying to figure out where my working area is. But anyway, if you're going to be getting into competitive building, judges are going to look for that. Those are huge craftsman issues, so you're going to want to take a lot of that stuff off. And I'll get to that we'll get to that as well. All right. So as I mentioned, this is a 2-in-1 build, so we have 2 sets of tires. We have the stock factory tires, which look really nice, and then the aftermarket high-performance low-profile tires. And of course with that we have the rims, that the aftermarkets and the stocks as well. So the chrome plating looks pretty clean. Looks like they've done pretty good on those. Not a lot of flashing on those. These are the aftermarket ones, which we will not be using. We're going to go with a factory look, so we will not be using those. However, they are very nice. They do look nice. I mean, they've got a pretty good detailed tread on there. Of course, those for the mold injections, well, those will have to come off, and we'll get those cleaned up. But the pad printing on there, the Firestone, the white ovals, those look really sharp and crisp. Tread on there is nice. Those are neat. I like those. That they've started doing that. I think AMT did that on some of their kits with the pad printing on the wheels, on the tires, and they just really make a big difference. They just really look good. All right, so the stock chrome. Most of this stuff. So the rims. Couple different techniques. A lot of this chrome plating from the factory I end up stripping off. To do that, I just have a little plastic tub. I do it in the garage, and I use oven cleaner. It's pretty toxic, but to breathe So I have a respirator that I use for when I'm painting all the time. But that's how I dechrome my parts, is just oven cleaner. Just foam it up on there. A couple minutes takes it right off, and just rinse it off. And then you're ready to do whatever you want to do, prime and paint whatever color you want. So even though I'll be chroming these back up, I still end up stripping the factory chrome off. So there's a couple of different things you can do. You can spray some dull coat on there. You can spray some actual aluminum on there. It'll dull it down. Or you can strip it off and then just start over. So not sure which technique I'll be using, but that's what I end up doing. So valve covers, for sure, that's going to be dechromed. So the bumpers and stuff, I've been leaving those chromed. But this one I think I might dechrome and chrome it back up with some sprays. The chromed insert, that's looking really sharp. It's got some good detail on there. With the Pontiac logo on the front. So again, maybe I'll leave this chrome, but then I'm going to black out the grill on the back there to give it a more realistic look. Alright, so that's our chrome parts. And then back to the body really quickly. So what first thing I do with my car bodies is there's always mold lines. You can see probably most prominent right there. Let me just knock that down a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about. So you can see there's a line right across the top of that. Now, when they mold these car bodies, there's almost always two mold lines that run down, usually the topmost part of the car body, which is the case for this as well. It's going to run down the rear window, it's going to run down the rear deck lid, the trunk there, and it's going to come across and come down the top of the fender here. And of course it's all around the perimeter, so it's going to be up under the wheel wells, everywhere. So that's one of the first things I do with my body, is get everything marked up with my marker as my guide coat, and then start sanding those off. A lot of times too, if you're not sure where the mold lines are, you can generally feel them. If you run your fingers across some of the edges, you'll feel the mold line kind of grab you a little bit. Whereas like if you go across the doors, it's pretty smooth. There's a nice curve in there, pretty smooth. But if you come up across the fender, you'll really feel a really sharp line, and that's what we don't want. So that's what we're looking for as we go through here. A couple other things to look for on this body. We've got some injection pin marks up underneath the engine bay, the shock tower. Luckily these are really shallow, so they come off pretty easily. So the headliner is another thing that I struggle with, because sometimes, depending on the kits, they'll put texture in here, or they'll put fabric lines, just add some extra detail in there, but then they have the injection pin marks too that make it kind of hard to take those off without taking off some of the detail that you still want. They've got a little dome light in there, molded in there, so we want to keep that in. But everywhere else, we want to kind of work on some of these to get them kind of cleaned off. And again, this completely up to you. If you're don't want to spend the extra time doing that, it's absolutely fine, because if it's just sitting on your shelf for you, then judges aren't going to be picking it up and being, oh, there's a mold injection pin mark. So it's completely your build, it's your hobby, it's your interest. Build it how you want to build it. Alright, so while I'm still talking, once I get those mold lines kind of cleaned off, a couple of tools I use to do that. One, you can use your hobby blade. Works really, really well. Just be careful. You can kind of scratch your body, which I used to do that in panic, but we have some ways to clean that up. But you can just kind of hold your knife at an angle and then just kind of scrape it along these mold lines and get them cleaned off. That works really well. One of the things I've noticed is, especially on the wheel wells, when I do that, it'll kind of jump. It'll skip along, and you'll get some texture on there, which is what you don't want. You're trying to take texture and everything off and make it smooth. So one other tool that I just purchased here, actually at MRS Hobbies, and this is a Master Tools. This is actually a mold line scraper. And you can see this is a much broader blade face. I don't get as much bounce out of my blade as I do with just the number 11 X-Acto blade. I think it's because it's heavier. It's got a shallower angle, so it's not as sharp, and it gives me a smoother scrape. So there's a couple of different things. If you don't have one of these tools, again, the number 11 blade works really well at cleaning up some of these lines. All right, once I get my body cleaned up, so you can use sanding sticks. Now they have these sanding twigs, which are smaller. I find these, I burn through these pretty quick, actually. And just kind of take those off. Again, if you can see a little black there, you know you still have some sanding to do. A couple of other things that I'll use are these sanding sponges. Now these are just pieces that I've cut out of sheets. These sanding sponges from Tamiya. They have some different grits. I've really been happy with these. I've just started using these a couple of months ago. I really like these. A couple of things is it's a sponge, so it's flexible, it's soft, and it gives you, it'll conform to the curves a little bit better than the sanding sticks and twigs will. So it gives you a nice, that way you're able to kind of sand on some corners, get a curve if you want to. After I get all the mold lines cleaned off, I'll actually, so this is a 600 grit. The 400 grit, when you're working on the plastics, I wouldn't go lower than that. If I need to do some aggressive sanding, like maybe here on the deck lid, mostly on the underside, it's a little bit more textured under here. There's a little more flashing, so there's more material that you do need to take off. For example, you can see that I'm sanding this off, but you can still see a little bit of black, even though this is really smooth. So you can see there's still some texture in there that I don't want. So I'll probably scrape that a little bit more with my scraper, and then start working on some of these injection mold sites. And then I like the 600. That's probably the one I use the most, is the 600. Then what I want to do is I want to go through and I want to just give it a nice scuff or just a light sand across the entire body. On this kit, the body looks pretty good. Molded in engine bay, firewall molded in firewall. It shouldn't be too bad we can just mask those off. I will be doing that black, so I'll just mask along you can see a pretty good line there from the body and the engine bay, so that won't be too hard. We'll just mask that off. Paint it black first, mask it off, get it sealed up, and then do the body blue. So that's not too bad. I like these molded, the door handles, those are kind of nice. One thing I did on mine is I scribed around them to give it a little bit more, to stand out a little bit more so it doesn't actually look like it's molded in. I am going to scribe that out, so that's another thing I do for body preparation. Once I go through, get everything cleaned up. Tamiya, I've used a couple different tools. Tamiya has this really neat panel line scriber. There's a couple of different tool bits you can get for it, different widths. So it acts just like your hobby knife, your number 11 blade holder, where you can interchange different bits on this thing for different widths. And another really great tool that I love, that Tamiya came out with recently as part of this, is this neat little chisel blade that's designed specifically for removing injection mold lines and marks and things like that, extra pieces that you don't want on there, and it works really, really well. But you can see that it's just perfect for scribing, getting rid of some of those extra plastic sink marks that you don't want. So it takes that right off, and then if we hit it with some sanding sticks, sandpaper, but as you can see, using that Tamiya chisel blade specifically for removing a lot of that extra plastic, it really smooths that off for you and just kind of expedites taking a lot of time sanding stuff down. Alright, so back to panel line scribing. So that's one of the tools that you can get for this handle. So the other thing that I really like with this tool is, again, the interchangeability with some of these parts, but the panel line scribing. Again, the 3 different widths that you can get, very, very nice. But one of the things that you can do with this is we can make our lines a little bit deeper if we want to. And you can see it's already starting to remove some material. And this, again, this is a new technique that I've just kind of picked up along the way. Again, the scale modeling channel, this is one of the things that that I picked up from him. But anyway, I've picked up a lot of techniques from him. So again, kudos to him with his YouTube channel. I've really learned a lot from him, and it's been super helpful. I enjoy watching his videos. He does a good job. So that's one of the things that we can do with our panel line scriber. And if we want to take some of our trunk lines and score those out a little bit deeper, especially like on the door jambs, which obviously in the real car they're actually straight through. So these are pretty pronounced. They're not too bad, but I want to take them deeper. I'll go through with my panel line scriber and I'll just really kind of take these a lot deeper. One of the things that I've noticed is as I'm learning this technique is, one, inevitably I will skip off where I'm scribing, say for example here, and I'll scribe down the car itself. That used to panic me, thinking I had ruined my car. That is not the case. I'll go over that in just a second. But the other thing is, especially like around the windshield and stuff, we just want to score that just a little bit. I've been finding that I'm scoring it a little too deep. The doors we want deep. The window frames, things like that, we don't want as deep. So again, just kind of something like that. So let's just say, for example, we did scrape down the side of the car. One of the things that I've picked up recently is some of this Mr. Surface. I was using the Tamiya primer itself, which is pretty good. That'll work. But the Mr. Surface has a bunch of different numbers. I think it corresponds to maybe like a sandpaper or something like that. But how thick it is. So what I'll do is I'll actually get a paintbrush and dip that on there, and it's pretty thick stuff, and I'll fill up my lines where I've scratched on there, let it dry, you're good to go. So one last little note, one of the things that I've kind of realized in doing this is when I made a mistake, generally I would panic and think that I had ruined my car and then I'd have to start over. Most of the time is not the case. There's a lot of things that I've screwed up on and I've learned that I can fix. So, you know, having said that, don't be afraid to try new things, because there's a million things you can do with these cars. A lot of guys will chop them up, customize them. There's just a million things you can do with them. So until next time, we'll see you then. Happy modeling, guys and girls.